Mike Ronan, and I'm sure a lot of you probably already know Mike, but Mike heads up the Wetlands branch of the Department of Environment and Science. So he's a guru on all things swampy and marshy, and a bit of a character as well. So Mike, what I'm going to do before we start launching into looking at the WetlandInfo site, I'm going to put you on the spot here. Tell us something, mate, about yourself that you might not necessarily share normally when you're talking about wetlands. Give us a little bit of an insight into your world.
Ooh, that's a bit unfair, but I'll give it anyway. Well, I wasn't always involved in wetlands work. I kind of spent quite a bit of my early life in Ireland working on badgers and otters. But actually, one of the areas that I did most of my research on in my early career was actually on the hormone receptors in the mammary glands of the lactating rat. So it's not something that you often start a conversation with anybody with, but it's something that probably the people in this room here won't forget about me the next time they see me around. There's not very many people who know that about me. So consider yourself quite privileged. I don't share it with too many.
Excellent. And what a great way to break the ice and start the session. So, Mike, I think we are a little bit late getting started. I don't want to eat into the time that you've got to present. So perhaps I can get you, if you wouldn't mind, to do your screen share.
Yep.
And bring up the website. And then I'm going to be quiet and let you do the talking.
Great. So can you see my screen there?
We can, yes.
Excellent. Well, thanks very much, and sorry profusely because I don't usually pride myself on getting started on time, but it's an interesting situation that in government we work really well with Teams, but then everybody in university and everybody else in the world works on Zoom. And so I think it might have been put in place so we're not supposed to talk to each other, but we're not having any of that, and we're all on board now. I'm Mike Ronan. I'm from the Department of Environment and Science, and as Greg said, I manage the Wetlands Program in Queensland. I again want to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which we all meet, and for me it's the Jagera and Turrbal people in Brisbane, and pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging. And being involved in wetlands brings you very, very close to thinking about First Nations people all the time, because these are places where First Nations people have always lived and lived very close to. It's a very dry continent, and wetlands are places that have water and other resources, and very, very close to First Nations people's hearts. I also want to thank Daryl for being able to set this up, and for all of the water and land carers out there and the wonderful work that you do. And of course, land and water is actually wetlands. So it's fantastic to see all these people out here that are actually working on wetlands, whether they know it or not. So really good. So we started the Wetlands Program in 2003. So that's 20 years we've been going now in the Wetlands Program. And when we started it way back in those times, we were actually working off the backs of an enormous amount of work that had been done by Gavin Blackman and other wonderful people who have worked on wetlands in Queensland for many, many years. But one of the things that we did right from the very beginning is we basically had determined that this was going to be something that we were going to be working on for a very long time. So it wasn't a kind of a flash in the pan. It was something where we wanted to create tools that were going to create a legacy, and that were going to be something that we could build on and improve over time. We did a lot of consultation, and we continue to do a lot of consultation. And one of the things we did was we went around, particularly myself and Kathy Ellis. I don't know if any of you have ever come across Kathy, but she was an incredible character. And we went the length and breadth of Queensland asking people what they wanted in terms of a database. And the resounding thing that they came back with was that they wanted to have a first-stop shop for wetland information. So they could get into the website and they could find what they wanted, irrespective of whether it was general information on wetlands or whether it was policies, legislation, mapping, anything that they needed, they would be able to get it on the website. Now, that was a huge monumental task, but we decided we'd give it a go. And now, 20 years later, we have what is the biggest wetlands website in the world, and it gets about 2,000 people a day using it already. It is actually something we have to report to Treasury on a quarterly basis as well. So it's actually got quite a bit of a profile. I suppose, as I said, what we really tried to do on the website is to cover all aspects of wetlands management, from what is a wetland to where are wetlands, what are the different types of wetlands, what's the value of wetlands, what are the threats to wetlands, how do you manage wetlands, so what's the concepts, what are the ideas about managing wetlands, then how do you monitor wetlands to make sure that the outcomes that you're trying to achieve are correct, and of course the thing that goes across all of that, which is communicating the wonderful values of wetlands. So the website is set up with that logic in mind. So they were the concepts, they were the ideas that we started with, and that's exactly the logic that's in the website. It's a very, very detailed website, and the further into the website you get, or the deeper down you get into it, the more scientific it gets. So it's structured in a way that has about 6 levels. So the top level has the kind of general information about wetlands, and that's done in the form of these like little tabs that we've got across the top. And then you can also navigate the website downside here as well. And then, as I say, as you get into it, you can dig down further and further and further, and the deeper you go, the more information there is, and the more scientific the information becomes. The other thing we've got, and we decided to do on the website, is we have 2, I suppose, pillars that we keep on the website as well. That is the bibliography. So there's a full suite of references, and at the moment there's 1,200 references used throughout the website, which is a massive resource in and of itself. But it's not just a list of where the resources are, the references. It also tells you where that reference is used on the website, so you can kind of cross-reference back and forth between the 2 places. The other thing it's got is a full glossary of terms. So what we've done is we've been extremely conscious throughout the website to only use, and as you can imagine, there are tens of thousands of pages on this website, but what we've tried to do is keep the consistency in the terminology we're using, and all of the references in terms of the glossary are all referenced. So we only use a term once, and then that will be the term that we use right throughout the whole website. This is a monumental task, because every scientist you come across wants to come up with their definition of what a wetland is and what water is. And so what we have to do is kind of beat them back into the box again, and that's not easy to do. So wetlands, what are they? I'm going to jump in a little bit, first of all, into what are wetlands. And basically what wetlands are is anything that gets wet long enough to have, I'll just get into the definition itself here and just into the systems so you can actually see what they look like. So basically what wetlands are is anything that gets wet long enough to have characteristics of the plants and animals that are adapted to living in wet conditions. So the kind of systems we're talking about are rivers, So all rivers are wetlands, all lake palestrine or vegetated swamps are all wetlands, lakes are wetlands, estuaries are wetlands, and so are marine systems. So effectively, and also subterranean areas. So aquifers, caves, they're all wetlands. So basically, when we go to the beach, my wife is going to the beach just to go to the beach. I'm going to a marine wetland. And she'll point that out to me often when we go. So basically, wetlands are really, they're everywhere. And and so because of the fact that wetlands are such a broad definition, and also because water basically accumulates at the end of the landscape in most cases, virtually all of the, if you want to manage wetlands, you effectively have to manage the land around them as well. So really, wetlands are a very, very convenient kind of a system if you want to think about the health of the entire landscape, because water flows down the hill into the wetlands, and they really are like barometers of what the actual entire landscape is like. So that's basically what the definition of wetlands is. And because of the fact that they're low in the landscape, you effectively are kind of managing the entire landscape to manage your wetlands. Another really important feature of wetlands is that because of the fact that they have water in them, they've always been used by people. So whereas in a lot of terrestrial systems, you get, concepts like national parks and so on to kind of, lock them away. The concepts around wetlands management are always about wise use. So it's the wise use of wetlands, the wise use of the systems, rather than a kind of a more protectionist type approach. And that comes right from our international kind of Ramsar conventions, the International Convention on Wetlands. So that's basically what a wetland is, and there's a whole suite of information in here on the website about wetlands, the wetland definition. There are also these little tools, these little presentations that are embedded throughout the website. So we found that we were given the same presentations over and over again. So we use a technology called ice springs. And basically what that does is it allows us to be able to take certain presentations that we give over and over again and to put them into the form of a standard presentation that's all citable. You can actually cite the presentation, and it takes you through what is a wetland. So if you don't want to actually listen to me yabbering on and you want to take your own time, the presentations are actually all in here. So, and we have presentations like this for wetlands values and various other bits and pieces throughout the website. So that's the definition of wetlands. And I suppose because of that very broad definition, that's why the website is so big, because you find that nearly everything you do affects wetlands, and we've just expanded and expanded and expanded the website because it actually, most things relate to wetlands. Now, this tool up the front is a wetland summary tool, and for people in Queensland, if you don't use this, I would highly recommend you do, because it's an incredibly powerful tool and gives you a huge amount of information. So if I was looking at a catchment or a local government area or a national park and I wanted summary information about wetlands and other things that affect wetlands, this is the tool that I would use. So there are some frequently used kind of areas in here, but I'll just click on more choices. And as you can see, this is the kind of areas that we can summarize information about wetlands for. So let's pick a local government area and just let's pick somewhere like Brisbane. So as I say, these occur for all of the areas within all the local governments within Queensland, all the NRM groups, all the sub-basins, all the basins. But I'll just pick Brisbane here, and you can get an idea of what this summary tool does. It basically summarizes, and I can click it up and pull it over here. It actually summarizes how much of an area is in the Brisbane City Council area. It comes up with the catchment stories, and I'll go into those in a few moments as to how they work. It comes up with all the statistics on how much wetland there is. So 7.9% of the total area of the Brisbane area is wetland. 1.4% of it is artificial. Then we've got the estuarine, the lacustrine, the palestrine, and the riverine. You can see the area. You can see all of the habitat types. So estuarine mangroves and salt marsh. You got coastal and subcoastal swamps. You got melaleuca swamps. It's all broken down. All the statistics are all there. It also gives you change in extent. So you can see from this that there's only 42% of our wetlands left. There's only 37% of our palestrine wetlands and that's broken down into habitat types. But then it also goes on and does a whole lot of other things, like there's the drainage division, the drainage basins, the sub-basins, the NRM groups. It goes into the bioregions. It goes into the regional NRM plans, if there was any World Heritage Areas, the Ramsar sites, the Directory of Important Wetland Sites, the national parks, the marine parks, the report cards, conservation parks, state forests, forest reserves, fish habitat areas, nature refuges, conservation assessments that have been done. It goes into groundwater dependent ecosystems. It gives you conceptual models of the area. It gives you the water planning areas, on-ground works that have occurred. And in fact, what I'd like to ask Healthy, the land and water carers, is if you can give me, in fact, we'll show you how we link to your tools actually. It gives you all the sewage treatment plants. It gives you the wetland projects that have been done. It gives you the bird zones. It gives you all the fish ways that are in the area. And it gives you an entire species list that you can then zoom into and write down into the profile of the species. So it's an extremely powerful tool. We update it every 3 to 4 times a year. And it actually means that you've got that information at the tip of your fingers. If you were to try and get that information yourself separately, it would take you basically weeks to get it, and then to put it through a GIS system. So it's a very, very powerful, useful tool if you're working in Queensland. And we are expanding that massively over the next few months, and we will be adding even more data sets in there than already exist. Any questions about that summary tool? It's pretty self-explanatory, but it is a huge amount of information. Okay.
No questions in the chat at this stage, Mike.
Okay.
We'll push on.
No worries. Okay, so another tool that we've got in here, because it's nice to have, and I'll go back to the starting page again. Another really handy tool is our wetland mapping tool. So many of you probably use the globe, but this is wetland maps. It's a slightly different platform, but very similar types of data sets. And I just want to specifically mention the wetlands mapping. So I'll just mention a few specific data sets in here that are pretty handy. So I'll just get down here to the Brisbane area again, and just Minjarra, North Stradbroke Island. And on the data sets here on the side, if you click on the wetlands mapping, there are 3 data sets. There are points, which are kind of like water holes and those kind of things. You've got lines, which are basically our drainage lines. So they're all of our rivers. And then you've also got our wetland areas. So if you can see the wetland areas there, you've got your same terminology again. You've got your lakes, you've got your estuaries, you've got your palestrine or vegetated swamps, and then you've got your riverine systems. Now, one of the big problems we have in Queensland is we do not have subtidal mapping. So when we get to Moreton Bay, there is actually no map of the habitats within the bay. Now, most of you probably don't deal with the coastal or the subcoastal areas, but it's a real kind of an issue. It's a big knowledge gap. But when we come to the mapping on land, it's very good. So this is Brown Lake. This is just Brown Lake over here on Minjerribah. And if I click on that wetland, basically I can see it's a lacustrine, so it's a lake, and then it comes up with all of the kind of information about the type of habitat it is, and I can jump off into the conceptual model that goes with that. So it actually tells me this is the kind of system it is, and then there's heaps of additional information in here about how these systems work. So lots and lots of really valuable information about that particular system, all coming from the mapping itself. It tells me it's unmodified. It tells me it's a coastal and subcoastal non-floodplain sand lake. And then I can also get management guidelines with these the non-floodplain lakes. It gives me a full kind of management profiles on how those systems actually work as well. There's heaps of information in there on those. The other thing that we were able to do recently with Geosciences Australia is every wetland now has a characteristics of how wet it has been over the past 40 years. So you can actually see that Minjerribah, the Brown Lake, the First Nations people, the Quandamooka, were complaining for years that the lake was starting to dry out. And you can actually see from this profile that that's actually what was happening to it. And if any of you have been over to Minjerribah, you'll realize that the actual boundary was starting to kind of retreat back. But fortunately, last year and the year before, because of the amount of rain we've had, it's regenerated right back again. Another really handy one, well, not handy one, this is a shocking thing that happened, but there's a lake down here at the bottom of Minjerribah, where this one here, you can see that the lake was really wet up to this particular point, and then there's been virtually no water in it since. Can anybody suggest to me why that might have happened? Anybody know the story of this one? No, nobody put anything in the chat. This was actually
a sand mining site.
Yes, it was. Yeah. Yes. Yeah. So basically, they broke the aquitard that actually sat underneath that lake, and broke the aquitard, which was holding the wetland up in the system, and all the water is run out. So you're absolutely spot on, Greg. That's actually what happened to that one. The other thing we have got, so you can actually go to places on the mainland. You can actually look at, so all farm dams are all wetlands as well. You can actually look at the farm dam, and you can actually tell when it's, usually you can tell when they're built. So this one has been built for quite some time. This one probably, yeah, these are all actually old. These are all about 40 years old. But some of the other ones, you can actually, you'd be able to tell that, yeah, like they were built. You can tell exactly when they're built. because you can actually see the water, kind of the water profile in them, you know, only starting at a particular time. As you can see, this one was built in 1989. So very, very powerful kind of bit of information. The other thing we've got in here is we've got the conservation assessments of all of the wetlands within Queensland have been done as well. That's with this tool called Aquabam. So if I turn Aquabam on and then I turn on the non-riverine wetlands, you can actually see where all of the values of those wetlands are. So these are all high value wetlands. These are medium value. And why this is really important is it's the highs and very high value wetlands out of Aquabam that go into matters of state environmental significance. So if you want to ever kind of wonder how do we get the kind of importance from a regulatory point of view on the importance of wetlands, it comes out of that particular tool that then gets put into the legislative processes. Now I could spend the next 2 to 3 hours on wetland maps. There's so much in here, but I just wanted to give you like an indication from those two particular data sets, you know, what kind of information we've got available. What I will do as well is I'll just put our Ramsar sites on, just so that people are aware in Queensland how many Ramsar sites we've got. So these are our internationally important wetlands. These are the ones that have kind of the same status as World Heritage Areas. We only have 5 of them. We've got Carrawinja Lakes, which is right out here in the west. We've got Moreton Bay. We've got Great Sandy Strait. We've got Shoalwater and Corio Bay, and then we've also got Bowling Green Bay up here. So as you can see, they're only very, very small areas, and they're our absolute cream of the crop. They're our absolutely most important wetlands. So popping back into our onto WetlandInfo again here, I'll just go. So we've been through kind of what are wetlands. We've been through the mapping. We've look a little bit about the aquatic conservation assessments. I just want to show you the amount of material we have in here on management. So there's a huge range of material in here on management. And we just last year released the whole of system values-based framework. And this forms the basis on which we recommend wetlands are managed in Queensland. And this is a government kind of a endorsed approach. So basically you've got your drivers for the system, and then we've got these principles around the side about synthesized science and information, maintenance, monitoring and evaluation, and then communication, capacity building and education. So those things kind of are our pillars for what you need to consider in this whole of system approach. And the logic we use here is that all systems, wetlands in particular, are made up of bits, which are components, and processes, so hydrological processes and biological processes. Those two things combine together to give you the services and the values that people give to wetlands. So you have the components and processes that give you the services or the values. And then different people value those in different ways. Then you come down to the threats to those values. And once you've decided on the threats to the values, but you know how the values are delivered because of the components and processes, you can then define your objectives for a project. And then you have 6 things that you can do You can have best management practice or pressure reduction. So if you took cattle out of a riparian area, that's a good example of pressure reduction. You could have extension education and awareness, because people might not realize the services they're getting from a system. So that's a really important one. You have systems repair, which many of you are directly involved with. You can have applied research. In other words, I don't even know enough about the system, so I need to do more research, but it needs to be applied. You can have engineering solutions, or you can have planned and institutional, some kind of planned and in other words, you need to regulate something, or kind of do compliance or something like that. Then you get into the detailed design and then implementation. So that's the framework we recommend for management of a landscape. That framework has then been applied in our aquatic ecosystem rehabilitation guidelines. So this is our aquatic ecosystem rehabilitation. These are the guidelines that exist for Queensland in terms of the process we recommend you go through for rehabilitation. So it's a 7-step process. As you can see, it's very similar to what we saw before. And then you basically go through these different steps, and then you can see you've got the same management options, and then you've got the monitoring components down here as well. Now, this would require a whole session in itself to go through, but each one of these steps is linked off to a whole heap of additional information. So we've got tips and tricks, we've got little tools that you can use, we've got templates that you can use. But one of the bits of the steps that I did want to take you through is the management interventions. So we have all the management interventions listed in here. And then when you look at the options, we have all the tools in here. So what's active revegetation? So we've got a whole heap of information on active revegetation. We've got information on assisted natural regeneration, bank battering, biopassage, gabion baskets, fire regimes. So there's heaps of really technical information in here that should assist you in terms of much of the work that you do in terms of rehabilitation. But it's sitting within the context of this broader rehab approach, which I've kind of gone through here. So huge amount of information in terms of a whole framework, and then a whole suite of tools that you can use as well. The other thing in the management guidelines is we have a heap of information. Probably not so many people in this room, but it's a really important area in the Great Barrier Reef, is treatment systems. So we have a whole heap of information in here on agricultural kind of, vegetated drains for water quality improvement, recycling pits, and there's heaps of additional information in here on all of those. So there's little conceptual models, how they work, considerations in putting them in, and so on and so forth. So lots of really valuable information in there on management. We've got information on wetlands and disaster management. Now, one of the other things we have as well, which projects are happening across Queensland, so we have your work recognised in here. So there's Queensland Land and Water Carers. So all the pins that you put in for the work that you're doing, that's all recognised in our tools as well. So these are the ones we've been able to record, but rather than duplicating what you've done, we recognise all of your stuff as well. And also the stuff from the Australian government, the feral pig stuff that's happening, all of the biopassage, and then the other stuff that's happening in the reef. We've got another suite of information here on management tools. So we've got a whole heap of management tools in here. We've got conceptual models on pressures to wetlands and how they work. So let's just have a look at something like the lakes and swamps. And then we've got them on things like salinity, the impacts of salinity on wetlands. And there's all kinds of, you know what I mean? It just, yeah, there's heaps and heaps of really detailed information in here on those as well. I won't keep going on that, other than to say there's quite a bit of additional information in here. I just want to finish up the last 5 minutes then, Greg, on two last bits, which is the monitoring tools. So we actually have some specific monitoring tools, and something I'd might like to really make you aware of is that we've just recently released an assessment tool which is called WetCat. And this is the Wetland Condition Assessment tool. It was just released 6 months ago. And that tool basically allows you to be able to go to a site and do an assessment of the condition of the site. We're doing one at the moment called MARICAT, which is for marine and estuarine systems, for that's things like mangrove, salt marsh, those kind of things. And we also are working on one for rivers called RiverCat. Problem is WetCat is actually a schnapps. I don't know any of you know WetCat, but my wife and I were up in Cairns, and I was delighted with WetCat being our little name for our tool. And I looked at this bottle behind her head, and there's a thing called WetCat, which is a peach schnapps. And how the hell they came up with the name WetCat is beyond me. But we're competing. I just hope we don't go to court, because I think they'll probably win. I don't think a wetland condition assessment tool is going to compare with a peach schnapps. And lastly, I just want to mention that we have lots of useful information in the ecology section here as well. We've got information on plants, we've got information on, and then they drill down and drill down and drill down into more and more information that on plants, animals, processes, and on the actual systems themselves. I'm going to finish the very last bit then on the very last tool, which is our little our catchment stories. So I just go back into Brisbane again, and just to show you what we've done for catchments, because this stuff can be quite overwhelming. Let's just get into the Logan catchment. We used a technique which, and some of you might have met me through this process. We use a technique called walking the landscape, where we get in with the local community and we walk virtually the landscape, and we get the stories of the people who live in the landscape, and we tell the story about how water moves in the landscape. And then we put together these catchment stories that basically we have done for, I think, about 55 catchments in Queensland. We have stories for a lot more of them. We just haven't been able to do it. But what they do, you've seen these catchments, this kind of technology. But basically what it allows us to do is to put together all the GIS layers with photographs, and tell the story about how water moves in the catchment. And then, of course, we have these nice little videos that we can use as well. You have to click it twice, and it actually shows you how water actually moves through the system itself. And then you can fly around the catchment as well, and it basically kind of shows you which direction the water actually flows in. And these stories have all the geology in them. They have the topography. They have things like World Heritage. So it's a real nice way of synthesizing a huge amount of information to then take yourself through any of the catchments in Queensland. So that's WetlandInfo. We are nowhere near finished. We're doing a complete update of the ecology section over the next 6 months. We've had to go to NASA to get some of the thinking that we need to do the ecology section. The wetlands mapping will be updated in 3 months. Huge update. It's taken them 4 years to do it. And this, we just keep adding and adding and adding and adding more information. So I suppose I'll just end the story by saying that the person who developed this with me, Kathy Ellis, passed away tragically 2 years ago. She had a massive heart attack at 50 years of age, and we miss her terribly, but her legacy, I suppose, continues on. And the team that manage it, which is only 1.5 people, basically we continue to keep putting new information in there, and our use rate goes up and up and up as time goes on. So please use WetlandInfo, get on to the site, subscribe, and every time we do a release, which is only about 4 times a year, we'll send an email out to you with all of the new things that we've put on there. So that's it from this side, Greg.
Wow, thank you, Mike. And look, I have to say from the outset, I was a little bit concerned about how you were going to get through that entire website in a 30 to 40 minute presentation, but you've done it very, very nicely. It's just such an amazing resource. There's such a wealth of information there, but like you said, you keep adding to it and adding to it and adding to it. But I think the thing I like about the website is you're adding to it in ways that the information's still easy to find and easy to use. So I think it's a real tribute to the guys behind this. One thing I would mention, Mike, that as you were going through, I tried to put a few links up in the chat there so that people could keep track of which pages you were showing on screen at the time. There's also on the website, there's also a search function, which I found very useful in finding those links. So, like I say, there's a massive amount of information, but it's well organized, and that search function is invaluable for finding whatever it is that you're looking for at the time.
Well, don't worry about remembering it, because what I'll do is we have this little thing called a user-defined fact sheet, which allows me to put and the water and land clearers. And then what I will do is after this, I just click the bits of the website that I've been through, and then I generate a PDF, and then everybody here has their own version of the website.
Oh, tremendous, tremendous.
So it pops out a little file here. And basically that is the version of what we went through today with all the links in it. So you don't even have to remember where they all are. It's just there.
Unbelievable. Very, very good. All right. Well, look, thank you so much for that presentation, Mike. Now, we have had a couple of questions that have come up in the chat, so I might just go back and find those. There was one question about what you and your team need to report to Treasury and why.
Yes, yeah. So we need to report efficiencies. So what we do is we've actually, because we very clearly kind of can identify who uses the website and how many hits we get on the website, that is then divided by the amount of money we spend in maintaining the actual site. And then we've got a target for the efficiency. And so our costs have not gone up in basically 5-6 years, but our hit rate is going up and up. It's tripled. So our costs are per visit of the website is going down and down. So it's actually called an SDS measure, and that's basically it's a efficiency in government is basically what we have to report on.
Are you able to share any stats about just
absolutely
figures about how many people use the website on an annual basis?
Yeah, absolutely, no problem whatsoever. I'll get those and send them out with the fact sheet. Yeah,
terrific. Okay, and I did see another question come through as well. It was regarding the marine cat. The question was,
marine cat. Yep.
Yeah, will shellfish reefs be included in that?
Absolutely, they sure are. And in fact, we want to do a trialing of Maricat for all of the systems, mangroves. It's been a very, very big job, as you can appreciate, trying to get a tool that goes across mangroves, seagrass, corals, shellfish reefs. You know what I mean? That logic works and that is applicable across all of those systems. And we're actually looking for people who want to trial the tool. So if there is actually a group out there that want to trial it, please get in touch with us and we'd be delighted to work with you to trial the tool over the next few months. Perfect timing, because we're just about ready with the draft of the tool, and then we can go from there if that person is interested.
Excellent. Excellent. And there's another question that's come up also, Mike, and if anybody else is sitting on their hands thinking about asking a question, we're going to wrap this up very shortly, so now's the time to put a question in the chat there. But Mike, a question about river cat and when it's going to become available.
River cat is probably a year away. It's going to kick off quite soon. There are actually, on WetlandInfo, we do actually have this assessment toolbox, which is this little fella here, and you can actually get in and launch it. And there are two very good tools already for rivers called RARC and TRARC. The river the riparian area condition assessment tool, and TRARC, which is the tropical one, and you'll be able to find links to them in there. But there isn't a river cat that actually exists at the moment. But we will be developing that with another team within days. Yes.
Terrific. And Mike, it looks like there might be some interest in getting involved in the Maricat trial. How can people get in touch with you too?
Oh, if they want to, I think you probably have my email address, or you can go back through Daryl, and we'll get in touch with you, and we'll make that happen. That'd be fantastic.
Terrific. Well, folks, if there's no other questions, I'll start to bring this session to a close now, and thank Mike once again for a great presentation and even more importantly, a great resource and a great tool there. So there will be a replay video available for this session, and I'll endeavour to timestamp it as well so that you can find the relevant parts of the presentation without having to go through the whole thing if there's parts that you just want to go back to and revisit. So Andrea, I'll try and get that through to you in the very near future, the next few days, and hopefully we can get that up on the QWOT website and YouTube channel shortly after that. So if there are any last questions, see something coming through from Lindy. Just scrolling through the chat there. Does your website include water quality data for specific sites, Hariba, etc.?
We don't have the water quality data on it. We do have the sewage treatment plant stuff, so that's actually in there. So where we have actually indicated where the sewage treatment plant releases and what the water quality information is, but that is actually a link to another website. But yeah, we don't actually have that particular detail on this website, but we definitely have the links to where you can get it.
Terrific. Okay, well, I think we're looks like we're starting to run into. Oh no, another question. Jeff Baines, is there a tool where organisations can assess the viability of a proposed project?
Yeah, that is actually part of the assessment, that rehab guideline that I had indicated to you. So you can actually go through, use that, and then you can basically look at the viability. Is it going to work? Will it achieve the outcomes that you want to achieve? And it forces you to ask these various questions. And then there's a really good tool called Infer that actually allows you to be able to look at, which we link to as well, that allows you to be able to kind of determine whether in fact this is going to be economically viable or whether it's going to produce a good outcome or not. But if you use that that rehab guideline approach that I put up here, which really is something we'd be happy to train some people up on if you want to. It asks the right questions where you can actually answer that particular question yourself. Yeah, definitely, yes, that tool will do that for you.
Terrific. Thank you very much, Mike. All right.
Thank
Well,
you.
on that note, I think we've just ticked past 1:30. It's probably time everybody gets back to work or gets back to lunch or whatever it is that you're doing. So, look, thank you so much, everybody, for coming along. Thank you for the great questions. Thanks once again, Mike, for a wonderful presentation. And I look forward to seeing everybody again in a month's time for the next topic. And I guess Andrea will be in touch in due course to announce what that topic will be and who the guest speaker will be.
Thank you very much for the opportunity.
Terrific. Thank you, Mike. Thank you, everyone.
Bye-bye.